The greatest thing in Michigan is to be a child of God. Amen. You're awake this morning. That's good. It's so good to gather together like this and to sing praises to our God and to encourage one another and just to be with one another is such an exciting time, and to be in God's presence. Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane was a chief surgeon of Kane Summit Hospital in New York City. He had practiced his specialty for 37 years. And he was convinced that general anesthesia was often too risky, that people should be operated on with simple, well-administered local anesthesia so that all the risk of general anesthesia could be bypassed. He was anxious to prove his theories. The problem was finding a guinea pig. Somebody who was willing to go under the knife and to be awake during that time. And all the people that he talked to, it seemed, that they believed in him and they believed that his theory was good, but they were fearful that they would, wake up during the surgery, that is, that their body, and they would start feeling the pain of that deep probing scalpel that was working in the surgery. But finally, he found a subject. Kane had performed appendectomies thousands of times. Matter of fact, when he tells the story, he estimates 4,000 times he had done this surgery. So it was, once again, the same procedure, and the patient was prepped and brought into the operating room, and the local anesthesia was carefully administered. The surgery was underway, and as always, he simply came to the right side of the abdomen. He made that cut across the narrow section, and he went in, and he tied off the blood vessels and found the appendix. He excised it. He finished with a nice, simple work of suturing the incision place. And remarkably, the patient felt very little discomfort. As a matter of fact, he was up and about the next afternoon, which was remarkable because back in 1921, normally after an appendectomy, a person was kept in the hospital for 6 to 8 days. It was a milestone in medical changes. But it was also a milestone in courage because the patient and the doctor were one and the same. Dr. Kane had operated on himself. That's kind of what I'm asking us to do today. I'm asking us, as I share about living above the crowd with integrity, to do some soul surgery. Because, you can't tell a person's integrity just by looking at them. You can't always tell their integrity by just listening to them. It takes a surgery, a soul surgery procedure on yourself. And I want the scalpel of the Word of God to go in our very soul and spirit and reveal the intentions of our heart at times. And to kind of whet your appetite to even go through that kind of surgery, I want to take a moment and just give you a dictionary definition of integrity. One part of the definition says that it's a firm adherence to a code of moral ethics, moral values, and unimpaired condition. A person with integrity is not divided, that's duplicity. A person with integrity, is not pretending, that's hypocrisy. You see, what is seen on the outside, if a person has integrity, matches identically with what's on the inside. And so people with integrity are policing themselves, all right? They don't have to be watched. It doesn't make any difference, whether somebody is looking or whether somebody is around or not. They're living their life the same way regardless. And in looking through the scriptures for an example of somebody who lived above the crowd in that kind of way, I got thinking of a recent sermon that I heard on Daniel. And it got me to thinking, because I went home and done some reading on Daniel again because it whet my appetite. And we all know Daniel so well, I thought it would be good to use some points out of Daniel again. Because I want you to notice with me that in Daniel chapter 5, I think we have a good example of what I'm talking about. Because in Daniel chapter 5, the background here is really familiar to almost all of us here. And that is, Daniel has lived his life through several different administrations, okay? And the latest is King Belshazzar. Don't you like the names of some of these guys? But that's the latest one. And in chapter 5, down in verse 31, that night, King Belshazzar dies at the hands of the Medes and Persians, and there's a new king, King Darius. He takes over the throne, and it says that in verse 31 that he took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Now, when you take over a new kingdom and you set up a brand new administration, it's a perfect time for stealing. You see, when the change is going on, things could disappear. Things of wealth, things of importance, things that could benefit you later. So it's an easy time for corruption to happen when there's a change of administration. And it's during that time that Daniel had just been rewarded for his good work under King Belshazzar, and that knowledge is recognized by the new King Darius, and he sees him as a trustworthy man. And so as a result of that, he puts him as one of the 3 commissioners who oversees 120 governors who together are going to guard and administer the king's treasury. And the Bible tells us that Daniel distinguished himself. Don't you like that? Among all the administrators, the other administrators, and all the governors, here is a man who distinguished himself. Otherwise, you and I would notice him. He's a good person. He kind of stands out in a crowd. All right? We see that all the time today. We see people who stand out. In whatever field that they're in. If somebody is outstanding, we get to know them. Most of you know that I love basketball, and so I'm old enough to remember when Michael Jordan started in the NBA and he was just an NBA player. But it wasn't long that he distinguished himself. And pretty soon, everyone knew Michael Jordan in the NBA. There are other sports individuals who excelled and got to be known in their particular sport above all the others. Now, we see that in almost every endeavor, that people distinguish themselves above others in the crowd. Some of you sitting here are doing the very same thing in your crowd. You're distinguishing yourself by using the gifts that you have, and nobody really told you to go do it. We didn't teach a class here at Waterford on how to do it. You just started developing the talents and gifts God gave you. And so, as you began teaching, or you began working in a ministry, or you began helping out here or there, you began to distinguish yourself as somebody who enjoyed this or enjoyed that, and you became better at it. And so you kind of, I know you don't want to, you stand out. People see that you distinguish yourself in one thing or another, and you're considered to be good at it. I love the people who are good at preparing food on Wednesday night. They stand out in my mind. Now, that's Daniel in his work. He stands out. And you want to know why he stands out? Let me suggest just a few answers, and I stole these a little bit from a lesson I recently heard about Daniel, but that's okay. I steal from the best. All right? But I want you to see that, first of all, he had a superior attitude. If you look in chapter 6 and verse 3 here, it says here that Daniel so distinguished himself that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Now, wait a minute, he was just appointed, an administrator over 120, and now because he's doing that so well, the king is thinking, I might just put him in charge of the whole kingdom. He has distinguished himself. Now, surely King Darius brought some of his own cronies with him. And surely the king has some people that he knows a whole lot more than he knows Daniel. But Daniel is doing his job so well. He's using his talents, his abilities, and there's something about him that's extraordinary. This attitude that he has about his work, about his life, that he just can't get past that. And so the king, not overlooking that, says, you know what? That's the kind of man I can trust to run everything for me. Wow. Have you noticed that no one comes up and asks you what your grades were in high school or college? I'm so glad that doesn't happen. And if you ask me, I'm not going to tell you. All right? But you know what? People are going to know your attitude whether they asked you or not. Because your attitude just pours out all over you. And they know whether your attitude is good. They know whether your attitude is mediocre, whether your attitude is bad. I mean, wow. There was a man one time who was invited to speak at a commencement address at a very well-respected school. And after giving his address, he sat down and they were recognizing different graduates for different things. And of course, the greatest applause of the day was for the valedictorian. But he sat down next to a faculty member that he had known for a long time. And he noticed that when the valedictorian was being applauded, that this faculty member wasn't clapping. And he leaned over, quietly said, "Obviously, you're not impressed." And the faculty member said, "Well, if they were giving awards for attitude, she'd be last in this graduating class. Her attitude stinks. Wow. Wouldn't you hate to be known for the one with the stinkiest attitude? That's interesting, isn't it? That someone so smart could have such a horrible attitude. I like what one coach said one time. He says, I want folks on my team with great attitudes. I don't want anybody with a sour attitude. That doesn't mean they're going to always agree with me, and it doesn't mean they're going to not say that some of the things that I hear are going to be a little bit hard to hear from them, but I want them to have a great spirit. Wow. It makes me take that scalpel and examine myself and say, Tom, how's your attitude? I know it's showing, but how is it? Are you living above the crowd? Wouldn't it be great if we could ask each other every once in a while, not how are you doing, but how's your attitude? You know, maybe first part of March, end of July, we just say to one another, how's your attitude doing? Sometimes that scalpel digs deep, and maybe we need to let it hurt a little bit if it'll tell us what's going on. Daniel possessed some exceptional qualities, we know that. He had a great attitude. The king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom because the king noticed that he planned to set him over the entire kingdom and the other administrators over all the other governors. And all of a sudden, it says here, they're trying to find something against him. Isn't it interesting that when someone gets promoted over other people, that for many, the first response is not, oh, that's wonderful. Oh, that's great. I'm thrilled that they got appointed over me. But instead, if you've got a bad attitude, you start looking over the top of your glasses and you start thinking, there has to be something I can find wrong with them. That's exactly what began here. And instead of us always being rejoicing with those who rejoice, you know, we need to always be somebody who doesn't fail to acknowledge other people's accomplishments. Why? Because God honors that. And we want to please him. These men, pagan as they were, they didn't have any interest in praising Daniel and his promotion because he's just not one of the guys. He's not one of the crowd that just fits in with everybody else. He stands above the crowd. And so as a result of that, they're trying to find corruption on him, and they can't find anything because, you see, it says he's trustworthy. And another characteristic that we find in Daniel of integrity is that he's faithful in his work. He's faithful in the discharge of the official duties given to him right here. Now, we're not talking about his religious life yet, but it's about how he did his work. He's in government business. He's assigned certain things to do, and he's doing what he's been assigned to do here. So they begin to investigate, and they're trying to find some sort of accusation against him, against his work, and he's diligent about it. He was honest about his work, and they couldn't find anything. They could have gone out and got 60 minutes and come in and done an expose and still couldn't find anything. They could search his files. They could follow him around at work because he was a faithful person at work. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 2, it says, "It is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful." And I don't know where everybody here is employed or if you're self-employed, but if you're faithful to the nth degree, if you're diligent, if you're punctual, if you're good-spirited, if you're cooperative, innovative, if you're interested in your job and you're working hard, my grandmother always said, cream rises to the top. You're going to be someone that your employer is pleased with, I promise you. Because those are the qualities that make you pleased by any employer. I'll never forget reading one time about a Christian businessman who made the statement that he had hired his last Christian. And when he was asked to explain that, he said, well, because I can't trust them. They're the ones who take advantage of me. They know that I'm a Christian, so they expect special treatment, a little extra time off, a little understanding when they're late to work or a lack of diligence. I've really hired my last Christian, he says. Now, if you and I worked for him, I hope we wouldn't be on his list of Christians who didn't do their work. I don't think we would be. I think we would do the job that we were asked to do to the very best of our ability. I don't think what he's talking about would characterize us. Because it didn't Daniel. There was no negligence. There was no corruption to be found. But I want you to notice another characteristic of Daniel, and that is purity in his private world. They couldn't find any negligence, no corruption. He has an excellent attitude. He's faithful and honest at his work, and now he's personally pure. Do you realize there's 122 men looking into his life? They're looking everywhere. They're looking under rugs. They're looking every place they can find to see if there's something about Daniel. There has to be something. Checking out his files, checking out his work, checking out his life. They're spying on him everywhere. They're following him. They can't find a shred of evidence anywhere against him. I mean, isn't that remarkable? You don't steal, do you? You don't lie, do you? You're not cheating, are you? I hate to tell this illustration, but I'm going to anyway. There was a man who decided to go away to school to train himself to be a preacher. Everybody was excited about his choice. He got taking his classes, and he got to one class that was extremely difficult. It was his Greek class. And for some, they adore their Greek class. For others, it's like, just help me survive. In his Greek class one day, they were translating from the Greek New Testament a portion of 2 Corinthians. Each one of the students in this small class was stumbling through it, but achieving the goal. And when it was his turn to read, he seemed to be reading a little easier than usual. And it was discovered by one of the other students that he was reading his Greek New Testament lower as he was reading an English version in his lap. Now, if you're translating Greek and you have an English to read, it's a little easier. Now, he was putting on a good act of difficulty in translating the Greek. And you know, he was really making it look like the words were hard to come by. But it was still looking like he was doing an easier job than he'd ever done before. Now, most Greek professors are pretty sharp guys. And so was this one. So while he was reading his Greek and peeking to his English, the professor made his way back and asked the student, "What are you doing?" To which he began trying to dismiss his actions with a lie, with the Bible on his lap. And the professor dismissed him out of the class, and he was eventually kicked out of the school for cheating. Do you know if you cheat here and there, cheating later on is easier? You have to determine that as a child of God, you are not going to be a cheater. Take that scalpel and make sure that's not who you are. Don't cheat. Now, you know the account of Daniel's story. They can't find anything to catch him on. So they're going to create something where they can catch him going against the king. And the Bible tells us that they tricked the king into signing a very dumb edict stating that if anybody believed in any authority aside from the king of the Medes and Persians, that they're going to be thrown into a den of lions. And Daniel finds out about it in verse 10 of chapter 6. Says, now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, I want you to look what he does. Now here's a man who's above the crowd. He went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. I really love this, don't you, brother? Because it says 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. We're looking at a man who, wow, has consistency in his spiritual life. That would be the fourth characteristic of integrity here, because Daniel was there praying and thanking God when things were good. He was there when life was threatening. He was there when a promotion was in front of him, thanking God. And he was there now when a lion's den just could be right around the corner. It's reported that at the funeral of Tom Landry, the famous Dallas Cowboy football coach, that as all the different players got up to begin sharing their memories of him, that almost every one of them pointed out his consistency. And Randy White, who was choking back his own tears, the All-Pro Hall of Fame linebacker, said, the things I always loved about Coach is that he just walked the talk. He didn't try to ram the stuff down us, he just walked the talk. That's virtually what every one of them was saying about Tom Landry. He was a man who walked what he talked. He lived by what he said. Do you know that's the greatest compliment that anybody could say about you or me? Is for them to look at us and say, you know, what you say is what you live. What you talk about is how you live your life. We can teach, we can preach, we can make food, we can visit, we can lead a ministry, but if somebody wants to get a flashlight and start looking real close at parts of our life, will they find nothing because we live what we say? If that's true, keep doing it. Keep being men and women of integrity. Live your life above the crowd around you. I am so thankful. I am so thankful for the folks who helped me see in the Word of God that God loved me so much that he created a way of redemption from my sins. I am so thankful for the people who made it crystal clear that you don't have to keep sinning, that you can turn from it and walk and live a different way. And it begins by accepting Jesus Christ and what he did for you. This morning, if we can assist you to start you on that path, we would love to do it while we stand as a church and sing this song. Will you come?